Hello, Fáilte now. There's a particular kind of cold that belongs to January in Ireland, and it isn't always the kind that comes from the weather. It's the cold that settles when the land is quiet, when movement slows, and when the noise of the year hasn't quite started up again. Traditionally here, this wasn't treated as a problem to be fixed. It was understood as a condition that needed observation and tending. So I want to ground this properly before we go any further. I'm Lora O'Brien, Irish witch, and I've been practicing this Irish witchcraft for over 3 decades, living and working here in Ireland, with my academic work also rooted in Irish regional history, and my spiritual work grounded very much in lived relationship with place. This podcast is a presentation of the Irish Pagan School, and everything that I share here and in all the work I do really comes from that overlap of scholarship, long practice and experience, and accountability to a living Irish tradition. So it's not from theory, not from trends, and certainly not from any imported frameworks. In our Irish folk understanding, the hearth, I'm saying Heaorth, the hearth, was never decorative. And it wasn't symbolic in an abstract sense either. As lots of people talk about the hearth of the home and hearth magic and all of that, and it's quite abstract. But in an Irish household, the hearth, the big fireplace, was literally the physical and the social centre of the household. And if the hearth wasn't steady, wasn't constantly going, then nothing else truly was. We got food, warmth, story, continuity, and protection, and it all gathered there. And when people spoke about a household being sound or unsound, they were often speaking quite literally about the state of its fire, but also about the people who tended it. And that matters because a lot of modern New Age spiritual language focuses on change, on transformation, on this constant movement. But Irish tradition's very clear that there are times when slow steadiness itself is the work. And January is one of those times. Now, if you're listening to this not in January, then of course you can always bring this slow steadiness into your work. But I was inspired for this episode by just feeling that stillness of the landscape, feeling the cold as I take my walks, the bone deep cold that just brings this quiet and this stillness and this steadiness. And when you have a cold house, you don't force heat into it. You have to build the fire. You have to tend it slowly so that it doesn't fail. You have to mind the fire. And in Irish households, the fire wasn't supposed to go out. We use turf as our native fuel source, and literally the last person to bed would bank up the fire, it's called, which is laying sods of turf over it, and the embers on the heart of it would stay, even if it was only a smoky looking pile. When anybody had looked at it through the night, when the next person got up the next morning and minded it again, it was like that heat, that warmth, that steady glow was still there. So even in the depths of winter, even when something looks cold or barren, we can mind the hearth. We can bank it up and we can make sure that when it's ready for a big flame, that we're also ready. with regard to Irish witchcraft and how this is relevant, I learned this very slowly and mostly through experience rather than theory. There isn't really a lot of theory, or certainly there wasn't when I was kind of trying to figure things out and had nobody to teach me. So I wanted to be that teacher for other people, which is why I do the work I do, right? But I learned through my own experiences, right? And I kind of figured out then what those experiences were, and that's where the theory develops from. There were years when I believed that strength meant constant action, constant output, constant readiness. But what my Irish folk practice taught me, often through frustration and fatigue, is that endurance isn't created by strain and pushing. Real strength and real endurance is created by maintenance. You keep the hearth going so that when movement returns, when it's time to cook the food, there's somewhere solid to stand. When people arrive, you have warmth for them, ready. So again, like in traditional Irish households, this hearth fire was banked up rather than extinguished, like whenever possible. There are literally households where the fire hasn't gone out in decades. And even when it was allowed to go out, if it was, because at certain times of the year, sometimes, if people were following the older ways, then you would clear out the whole fire. But there were customs around how and when it was relit, because an untended hearth wasn't just inconvenient, you were vulnerable. Your household was vulnerable, your children were vulnerable. But also, from the other world, fire was protection. Fire is part of the old folk magic as well. So fire is protection, fire is continuity, and fire marks a household as alive and held together. The charms and practices in folk magic that are associated with the hearth are quite quiet ones often. They aren't dramatic, and they aren't about calling something new into being. They're really about like holding what already exists in a workable, livable state. How do we maintain? And none of this is nostalgia. It's practical magic. It's what I've lived and breathed, again, for decades. But the idea of a steady hearth carries far beyond an open fire. You might be listening to this and saying, yeah, this isn't relevant for me. I'm not allowed to have fire in my household, or I can't have fire, or we don't have a fire in my household. But this actually applies to any household, any living space, and any place where you return to yourself at the end of the day. The actual foundation, the logic remains the same. If the centre, the sacred centre, is neglected, then everything else starts to wobble. There's a hearth right in you, regardless of where you're living. And my tradition doesn't shame people for feeling worn out. We assume that wear and tear happens. The response to this isn't analysis or aspiration. If something gets worn out, if something, runs low, the response to it is we tend it. We feed it. We help it. We support it. Just like we're tending the fire in a hearth. So what I'm going to give you now is a very simple hearth steadiness charm that's adapted from an older tradition that I came across and based around that logic. So it's not seasonal theatre, it's not self-improvement work, it's pure domestic magic in its most honest form. It can be done in any home, doesn't require an actual hearth or even a fire as such. Ideally have a live flame. Honestly, it is the best. If you can possibly manage it, have a live flame. But use a feckin' torch if you really, really don't have access to that. Use a torch, use the light, okay? Or a little battery powered tea light or whatever you need, right? it doesn't require special tools. It requires attention and restraint on your part. So choose a place in your home that functions as a centre, as a sacred centre, something that's relevant to you. Could be your kitchen, could be a table where you regularly sit, or a bench. Could be a space where you naturally pause rather than rushing through. You don't need to make it special or decorate it or anything. Irish practice doesn't really care about aesthetics. Do whatever you want to do, fair enough, but you don't have to. Again, ideally you need a candle or another small, safe flame. Now you could also do this with an actual fire in your hearth as well. Obviously, I'm just giving options. And you're also going to need one ordinary household object that you already use regularly, like your favourite mug, your favourite plate, your favourite utensil. I mean, I'm sure it's just not just my neurodivergent arse that has a favourite fork. So use something that actually matters. And it matters because it already belongs to your daily life. It's not a prop. And it's not being elevated beyond its place. You don't have to ritually sacrifice it or anything, right? So what I really want to get across to you in this podcast and in my teaching about Irish witchcraft is the mundanity of it. And you're going to hear me talk about this time and time again. Small flame or a big fire, whatever you have, and a really ordinary object that is in everyday use for you, right? Personally, something that you use personally every single day, or most days at least, right? So you put this object near to the candle or the hearth fire and light the flame calmly. And then you sit or stand comfortably nearby. Take a moment to notice the space as it actually is, not as you think it should be, not some traditional Irish cottage, massive big hearth fire with the little stools and the fire crane arm that, the pots swing off, right? If you have that, great. Go for it. Use it, obviously. But whatever space you have, whatever is your sacred centre in your hearth, look at it, right? Look at it as it actually is. This is where things happen in your home. This is where you land. Then you speak out loud. It doesn't have to be poetic. It doesn't have to be, anything fancy. But do actually speak it out loud. Hear your own voice. Irish charms are generally spoken plainly. Sometimes they're muttered under your breath. Now that might be a bit of a different type of a charm or a curse, right? But most often I think they're meant to be heard. The voice is so important in very, very ancient Irish magic. Now we're talking a lot about folk practices, but I'm also a dedicated priest of the Morrigan, and the use of voice and sound and noise magic goes way, way back. So if you can speak it out loud, please, please do. And here's an example of the kind of words that you might use. You can adapt them to your own voice, your own situation if you need to, as long as you keep the meaning clear and grounded and simple. So you might say something like, "This is the hearth of my household. Warmth is kept here and not neglected. What sustains this home is tended with care. What keeps us going is allowed to remain steady. Nothing essential is let run down or forgotten." So say this slowly, don't rush. There's no need to repeat it over and over again, but really say it and hear it and mean it. Irish charms, again, that's not very poetic, right? You could probably do better. But Irish charms rely on clarity, not on insistence or desperate repetition. So after you speak your charm, take the household object into your hands and acknowledge it for what it is. So you might name its use out loud, or you might simply recognise that it's carried in ordinary life. This isn't sentimental. It's just recognition, right? And then say something again in very plain language, say something out loud. As this object continues in use, so the steadiness of this household continues. As long as it's cared for, what it supports doesn't collapse. Now, allow the candle to burn for a few minutes and then extinguish it safely. If you're using your hearth fire, your actual fire, let it go out. Or, leave it get its whole power. But if you have a candle, don't leave it burn down. Hearth magic is not about attention. Hearth magic is about attention. It's not about like abandonment. If you have a fire, tend it. If you have a candle, make use of the flame and then keep it for next time, right? Hopefully you get the drift. And again, any of this stuff can be adapted. Now, I do just want to tell you a little, because inevitably somebody is going to use their favourite mug, do this spell, and then break the mug the next day, which is exactly what I did. Actually, it wasn't the next day, but it was a couple of months later. I had a particular mug that I love, and as this object continues in use, so the steadiness of this household continues, and then gut and suddenly the mug gets smashed and it's like, oh feck, right? Replace the mug, do it again. Okay, just make sure that you're actually replacing it. Make sure that it's something, or choose a different one, but do this spell again. If something does happen to the utensil, just do this spell again and substitute in whatever you are actually using every day. So if it's a replacement that you are going to be using, make sure that you use it every day. But you can also just choose something else that is in use every day, right? No need for panic. So once you're done, you return this object to its normal place and continue to use it every day as you would. And every time that it's used in the coming days, it quietly kind of reinforces this work. It's a reminder, either conscious or subconscious, that this work has been done. The steadiness then is carried forward through ordinary life. So rather than having to repeat the performance, having to do this spell every single day, you have now instilled this household object with this steady repetition, right? Now remember, like, that hearthwork isn't about control. It isn't about forcing calm or productivity, especially over other people, but also over yourself. It's about maintaining the conditions that allow your household, your home, and the people in it to just endure, to be maintained, to be supported without unnecessary pressure or collapse. Like, everything has a season, right? And if something truly needs to change, if this spell highlights something that does need to change, it'll do so more safely from that steady centre, okay? And that's the standard, if you're listening and feeling the urge to push or fix or escape, it can be worth considering that steadiness is the wiser work right now. Now, again, this could be January when you're listening to this, or it could be a season in your life when this podcast episode finds you. Who knows? But there's no failure in tending to what already exists. So if you'd like to continue working with grounded Irish practices just like this, you can join our TUA mailing list at irishpagan.school/community. And simple Sunday spells are sent out monthly, sometimes bi-weekly, but there's monthly definitely. I think they're on the first Sunday of every month. And our TUA community members also receive Irish Pagan resources and authentic cultural communications which are rooted in our living tradition. And remember that the hearth has always been a place of return rather than display. So when it's kept steady, everything else has time to find its proper rhythm. So I want that for you in this season of cold or this season of your life as you're finding this podcast, I want you to find your proper rhythm. So hopefully that was helpful. Make sure you like, review, comment, do all that good stuff. This is a relatively new podcast. Share it with a friend. Get the word out for me, because maybe it'll help somebody else that you care about. So, slán go fóill, I will see you next time.